The last meeting between Moshe and Paro, from the perspective of the Mitzrite nation, was an absolute disaster. But from Moshe and Aaron's perspective, it was successful. Moshe had completed this stretch of his mission, and no more would he come into the sickening confines of Paro's idolatrous palace, and he was no longer required to bring any more plagues. The last plague, the death of the firstborn, would be initiated by Hashem himself. Paro ended the meeting's negotiations with, "Get out of my sight at once, do not ever come before me again, for the day you do, you will die." And Moshe replied, "It is quite true that I will never come to see you again in your palace, but soon you will come to my house with your servants. This will happen around midnight very soon." As Moshe was about to leave, Hashem lifted him up outside of the contaminated domain of the idolatry and gave him one final message which he related to Paro. Moshe said, "On the eve of the 15th of Nisan at the midnight hour, the time of redemption of the nation of Israel will arrive. Hashem will punish all the remaining wicked people of your nation and send out a plague that will be equal in devastation to all the other plagues combined. The plague will strike in the middle of the week in the time of the constellation of Madim, a time which is a sign of disaster for you. All the firstborn of Mitzrayim will die, from the families of the most prominent princes to the lowest slave who pushes the millstone in your prison. Every firstborn of your gods will die, including the firstborn of your animals." Prophetically, Moshe then started pointing out by name all the firstborn present in Paro's palace, unsettling the whole room. But Paro replied, "Do you think you frighten me? How bad can this plague be? There are probably no more than a few hundred firstborns in all of Mitzrayim." "Not quite, your majesty," Moshe replied. "The criteria for firstborn are the first child of either father or mother. Therefore, your average promiscuous Mitzrite may have fathered as many as 10 firstborn children by 10 different women. You may also have one woman who bore 10 firstborn children to 10 different fathers." At this, Moshe and Aaron for the first time turned their back on Paro and left his presence. As the sun was about to set, they went out to a designated place of prayer, and there Hashem gave them the mitzvah of the sanctification of the new month of Nisan. This would be the month in which the nation of Israel would be liberated from Mitzrayim, and it was now to supersede the month of Tishrei in greatness and become the new month of the Hebrew year. All months of the year would therefore be ranked in relation to the Exodus. Hashem then instructed Moshe and Aaron on the Korban Pesach, the command to sacrifice a lamb or goat on the 14th day of Nisan. On the same day, Hashem would pass over the Hebrew homes and deliver death to all the firstborn of the Mitzrites. It would be a signal that the beginning of Pesach, a 7-day festival ending on the 21st day of Nisan, the day the nation of Israel would cross the Yam Suf, which would be the climax of the Exodus. The animal that was chosen for the Korban Pesach was a lamb, the astrological sign of the month of Nisan, and an animal that the Mitzrites worshipped. By sacrificing this animal, Israel was declaring that the Mitzrite gods were powerless. Ironically, a communal sacrifice of this animal by the Hebrews would normally invite a violent Mitzrite reprisal, but in this instance, this very act would protect every Hebrew household from death, any kind of death, period. All Hebrew families were required to take a 1-year-old lamb or goat without blemish on the 10th of Nisan. The animal was required to be tied to a bedpost and kept under observation for 4 days until the 14th of the month. A household too small to consume an entire lamb in one night would join with another household. An olive-sized piece of lamb was the minimal amount that had to be eaten. The slaughtering could be done by a member of the household or an appointee. The blood was to be collected in a basin and applied to one doorpost, then the second, and then to the crossbeam of the doorway. The lamb was to be roasted over a fire and eaten after nightfall and consumed before daybreak, and the bones of the lamb could not be broken, and it was to be eaten with bitter herbs. No one was permitted to leave their homes until the lamb was completely eaten. No uncircumcised Hebrew or convert could partake of the lamb whatsoever. It was also essential that every Hebrew take some sort of role in the slaughtering and eating this so-called Mitzrite god. The roasting of the lambs would drift throughout the land as a sickening accompaniment to the Mitzrites' anguish. Moshe called together all the elders among his people and relayed the laws of the sanctification of the new moon and the laws of the Korban Pesach. From here they sent groups out to carefully disseminate everything Moshe taught to every family. The 10th of Nisan fell on Shabbat, and all the firstborn Mitzrites heard the wailing of the sounds of lambs from Goshen. Some went out to investigate and were told that the Hebrews were instructed to sacrifice, roast and eat the lambs so that Hashem would pass over their homes and not kill their firstborn. At this the word spread and all the known firstborns began to panic. Panic turned into rage, and they rallied to go in and slay the Hebrews. But Hashem incapacitated them every time they tried to move toward Goshen with this intention. They decided to go to Paro to plead that the Hebrews be released, but he would not listen, and as a last resort they all turned on their own fathers. That night, 600,000 Mitzrite fathers were killed by their firstborn sons. At the stroke of midnight, at the precise moment when the two halves of the night meet, an amazing phenomenon took place. As the full moon hung in the night sky, the darkness was suddenly dispelled. All of Mitzrayim was illuminated as if by the midday sun. Then thunder and lightning rent the skies, and a poisonous gas began to fill the air. When a Mitzrite firstborn inhaled the gas, he began to have violent seizures. Some died quickly, while others were not so lucky. The death of the firstborn struck every Mitzrite family without exception. There was one childless widow with no extended family whatsoever, who screamed with the most heart-wrenching cries of all. She was of noble standing and present in Paro's court, and actually confronted Moshe during his last audience with Paro and said, "How will I be affected? I have no one, and I am not a firstborn myself." This woman had a firstborn son who had passed away years earlier. As it turns out, a memorial she had built for him, which she visited every day, crumbled to dust. This drove her insane with grief. Other families with no living firstborns saw wild dogs enter cemeteries and dig up and drag out the remains of their firstborn relatives and scatter them in the streets, causing them much anguish. Not all firstborns died straight away. One group died instantly at midnight, and the second group collapsed and continued to struggle for life until daybreak. A third group took 3 days to die, writhing around in agonizing pain. Even people visiting from other nations who had firstborns also died, so the Mitzrites could not attribute the phenomenon to gods of other nations. Paro could hear screams erupt all over the land. As he went to check on his own family, he noticed that all of his family had died. The only exception was his daughter Basia, who herself was a firstborn from her mother. At the revelation of the loss of so many members of his own family, and the fact that he was a firstborn and would probably die very soon anyway, he drew his sword and went throughout the entire region with a guard, slaughtering any council members who influenced him to ignore Moshe and Aaron from the start. Meanwhile, Mitzrite citizens began to storm the palace to kill Paro themselves, so he fled into the streets toward Moshe's residence. When he got there, he heard joyous singing and rejoicing over the good fortune that Hashem had given the nation of Israel. Paro knocked vigorously on Moshe's door. "Who is it?" exclaimed Moshe. "It is I, a defeated and humbled man. Moshe, my friend, please pray for me, I beg you." Then Paro spoke the magic words. "Leave Mitzrayim, take everything you want, go on your 3-day journey as you have requested all along." And by daybreak, as Paro ordered, Israel finally left Mitzrayim. If you like the content of this channel, get a hold of this book. It is literally jam-packed with information you will not find in most Torah publications. Its pages include topics like the fable of the money-hungry Jew, the lie that propelled the Holocaust, the real root of anti-Semitism, rightly dividing Mashiach, which contains startling truths about the Messiah you will not read anywhere else, Judaism in the New Testament, updated information about the creation of the Golem and the false Messiah, the commandment to wage war, the truth about the Shield of David, a compendium of all the false teachings in the Messianic movement to help you navigate what is truth, biblical capital punishment, and why you should be frightened of sinning, the significance of the land of Israel, the obligations of the student, the eye in the triangle, sanctified sex, how to think like a Jew, and much, much more. There is also an updated chapter 1, and along with all the other chapters, has hundreds of footnotes and references. This is a book that took 10 years to research and compile, and will be a welcome addition to the library of any discerning student of Torah and Mashiach. Get it today on Amazon and other online bookstores. Bye for now.